On the 6th of August 1915, thousands of well-equipped German soldiers broke rank and ran, screaming from a trench. They weren't outgunned. They outnumbered the enemy nearly 70-1. They ran because the men charging at them were supposed to be dead. This isn't a ghost story. This is the Battle of Osowiec Fortress. And today, we're going to look at the single most terrifying counterattack in military history. A moment so gruesome, it broke the psyche of an entire military division. But before we get to the attack, we have to look at the weapons that caused it. Because what happened to these men wasn't just war. It was a science experiment gone wrong. Let's set the stage. It's 4 a.m. The Germans have been trying to take Osowiec Fortress for months. Hadn't worked. And this wasn't just stubborn pride. Osowiec sat in the middle of swamp and marshland, guarding one of the few usable routes through that entire region. If you wanted to push deeper into the Russian Empire from that direction, you had to go through it. You couldn't just walk round this place. The terrain made it a bottleneck. So the Germans did what Germans do when they face a bottleneck. They brought bigger guns. Earlier in the siege, they rolled out some of the heaviest artillery in the world. Massive siege mortars. The same kind of monsters that cracked Belgian fortresses in days. They hurled shells weighing tons of kilos at Osowiec, expecting it to fold like everything else in the Western Front. But it didn't. The fort was old, but the earthworks and marshy surroundings soaked up the punishment. Infantry assaults failed. Artillery barrages failed. Every proper method in the German playbook had been tried. And still, this stubborn little fortress refused to die. So, Field Marshal von Hindenburg decides to stop playing nice. He orders the deployment of 30 gas batteries. Now, this wasn't the mustard gas of later years. This was a heavy concentrated mixture of chlorine gas. And when the wind turned towards Russian lines, a wall of green gas 40 feet high and 8 kilometres wide, roughly 5 miles, began to roll over the ground. When chlorine gas hits the moisture in your lungs, it doesn't just suffocate you. It reacts with the water to form hydrochloric acid. Effectively, these men weren't just choking, they were dissolving from the inside out. And it wasn't just the lungs. Chlorine is indiscriminate. As that cloud crawled forward, it didn't care about uniform or flags. It attacked everything. Metal fittings on equipment began to erode almost instantly. Shiny brass and copper dulled and then bloomed with sickly green corrosion. The gas clung low to the ground. A moving carpet of poison that seeps into the trenches, the dugouts, any low place man could think to hide. Remember, this was 1915. Gas warfare was still new. There were no proper mass-issued gas masks to the Russian side. No rubber seals, no charcoal filters, no training telling you what to do when the alarm sounds. The idea that the very air itself could be turned into a weapon was still somewhat of just a nightmare, more than established military doctrine. The Russian defenders, the 226 Infantry Regiment, didn't have gas masks. Their only hope was chemistry. They soaked their undershirts in water, or, knowing that ammonia neutralizes chlorine, they soaked them in their own urine. It was a desperate attempt to buy a few more moments of life. Didn't help much. Witnesses described the grass turning black. Leaves fell from the trees instantly. The copper on Russian soldiers' guns turned green from rapid corrosion. And the men, by all accounts, the 9th, 10th and 11th companies were wiped out instantly. Those who weren't killed outright were left writhing, blinded or stumbling. Blood poured from their mouths and noses as the inside of their lungs turned to an acid-burned pulp. Silence fell over the fortress. As far as the laws of biology were concerned, the battle was over, but the Germans made one fatal mistake. They assumed dead meant unable to fight. Imagine being a German soldier in that moment. You're wearing a high-quality gas mask, you have a rifle, you're part of the 14th Landwehr Division, marching forward to secure the ruins. You weren't expecting a fight, you're expecting a clean-up operation. You're walking through a silent green fog, stepping over dead birds and blackened military equipment. The air still stings your eyes, even through the mask. Your boots squelch in mud that's been churned up through days of shelling and is now coated in a film of chemical slime. The German commanders are already writing their victory reports. They believe there isn't a single living soul left. They aren't marching into battle, they're marching into a graveyard, or so they thought. But as they approached the ruins of the trench, the green mist began to shift. They heard something, not a battle cry, but sounded like drowning on dry land. Wet ragged, bubbling breath coming from somewhere that should be silent. Suddenly, from the chemical fog, 60 to 100 men stand up. These aren't soldiers anymore. Witnesses said they looked like they'd risen from the grave, blood-soaked rags wrapped around their faces, stumbling forward as the gas destroyed them from within. Uniforms still dark with blood and bile, eyes red and swollen, some half-blinded, guided more by sheer rage and habit than by sight. And it wasn't their weapons that broke the Germans, it was the sheer psychological horror of what they were seeing. Sub-Lieutenant Kotlinski, the highest-ranking survivor, led the charge. These men knew they were dying. They had minutes left to live, and they decided to spend those minutes taking the enemy with them. They charged with bayonets. They couldn't yell, hurrah! The acid had taken their vocal cords, so they charged in terrifying silence, occasionally broken by men coughing up parts of their own lungs. Some accounts describe them spitting up a bloody foam, clutching their chest between steps, but still forcing themselves forward. And the Germans' advance, it collapsed. The sight was so terrifying that the front line panicked. They dropped their rifles, ran back into their own wire traps. They trampled each other in a desperate attempt to get away from the dead men. 60 to 100 dying Russians routed the advance of nearly 7,000 men, not with firepower, but with fear. The Germans had the numbers, the training, the technology, but they didn't have an answer for the men who'd already accepted they were dead and charged anyway. The Russians evacuated the fortress days later. They demolished what was left so the Germans couldn't use it. Sub-Lieutenant Kotlinski died of his injuries that same evening. Osowiec would eventually fall empty, but not conquered in the way the Germans had planned. What they took was a ruin, a legend. It outlived the war, the fortress, and everybody who fought there. Over a century later, it's still retold in books, documentaries, even heavy metal. The Swedish metal band Sabation wrote a song about it, turning those choking, half-dead soldiers into something larger than life, a symbol of defiance, when every rational calculation says, you should be dead. The attack of the dead men proves one thing. You can destroy a man's body, but you can't put a number on what a dying man will do with his last 5 minutes. If you think this story was brutal, you need to see how Vikings define cruelty. There's a lot of debate whether the blood eagle was actually real or myth. Click this video to find the gruesome truth and follow Bearded Banter for more.